And we're live. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, and today's just going to be kind of on the light side of just exploring topics and thinking about them. If I know some of the things we might talk about might seem kind of heavy, but compared to some of the more technical talks, I think you'll know what I mean if you've seen some of them. So. I found that it's helpful to just shoot the breeze a little bit, just so YouTube has time to notify people and people have time to respond and maybe look at the channel. So it's really great hanging out with you all. So maybe just to start off, to shoot the breeze a little bit, I've been reorganizing the basement bookshelves here. Actually, this is the basement. We actually have a room in the house that the family has called the library. So this really isn't the family library, even though it actually has more books. We have more books here than our official library. And maybe when the weather gets colder, I'll move the studio up to the library, so you get to actually see our library. Because right now it's really hot, and it's cooler just to operate my office from the basement. So, in the process of cleaning up, I found this book, Righteous by Lauren Sandler. And let me try to see if I can get a picture of Lauren Sandler here. All of us have aged since I'll tell you about Miss Sandler here shortly. And so Miss Sandler sent me an email, I would presume, 2005, 2006. I don't remember the exact date. Let me see, when did she write this book? It might have been 2005. Might have been. Anyway, the copyright on this book by Lauren Sandler is 2005. So let me show you Miss Sandler here. And this is an older picture of, this is a more recent picture of her. She looked, so just imagine her 16 years younger, and I'll share that photo. This is Miss Sandler here. And she sent me an email some time ago. I probably still have it somewhere in the archives of my email account. And she said, I'd like to talk to you. And of course, I was very flattered. She said, I'll take you out to dinner. And she said, I want to have a conversation. She's writing a book. So what was that book about? She was reporting, it's called Righteous: Dispatches from the Evangelical Youth Movement. The original title of the book, at least when she emailed me, was not Righteous. It was The Young Evangelicals. So she was writing about all these young evangelicals. And it really is, let me see. So she invited me out to dinner. Of course, I accepted. I'm always eager to talk about myself, if you haven't noticed. I'm always eager to talk about my work and my activities. At the time, I was an engineer in the aerospace industry, and also I was simultaneously a student at George Mason. Although by that point, an extended studies student, I had already finished my 3 degrees. So let me see. Let me read a little bit. And I really wanted to say, I just thought this book was, I couldn't believe what I was reading. So this is what she had. This is not a friendly book. She's an atheist. Oh goodness, she's a diehard atheist. Big lover of Richard Dawkins. And I'll have to, come to think of it, if I remember it, I'll have to read what she had to say about Richard Dawkins, if it's still on the internet, because it was really funny. she's saying how much she just kind of drooled over the guy, and that's the kind of professor she would want to have an affair with. It was really funny. So anyway, this is from the, the inside, the insert, I guess it's called. She said, "There's a new youth movement afoot in this country. It's the counterculture fusion of politics and pop, and it's taking over a high school near you. Like the waves that came before it, it's got passion, music, and anti-authority posturing. But more than anything else, this one has God. So what does it mean when today's youth counterculture has a mindset more akin to Jerry Falwell's than Abbie Hoffman's?" In Righteous Dispatches from the Evangelical Youth Movement, Lauren Sandler, a dynamic young journalist, reports from this junction of evangelicalism and youth culture, traveling across the country to investigate the alternative Christian explosion. Using the grassroots modus operandi of the 1960s, these religious kids, part of the disciple generation, as Sandler calls it, turned an anti-authoritarian sneer toward liberalism, feminism, pacifism, and every other hallmark of that era's counterculture. And they're engaging their peers with startling success, fusing pop culture, politics, and religion as they preach from the pulpit of the skate park, bar, and rock concert. Secular, liberal, and practically the embodiment of everything evangelicalism deems unholy, Sandler travels the skateboard missionaries, hangs out with the tattooed members of post-punk Seattle megachurch that has evolved into a self-sufficient community, camps out with rock and roll anti-abortion group, and gets to know the rap preachers who are merging hip-hop love of money with old-fashioned Bible-beating fundamentalism. Much more than a mere observer, she connects with these young people on an intimate level, and the candor with which they reveal themselves to her is truly astonishing. Illuminating, often troubling, and unapologetically frank, Righteous introduces a bold new voice into the ongoing debate over religion in American life, and it is the first in-depth front-end exploration of the country's new moral majority, dressed up in punk rock garb, and what its influence could mean for the future of America. And where I was headed with that, and let me also greet people here. I'm going to go to the chat. Now, this is 2006. You think about what 15 years have done, and we've seen kind of, this is meant to kind of scare a lot of, say, her secular friends and audience into thinking, oh, the Christians are going to overrun the country. And I totally saw that was not true. I could totally see at the time that the Christians were the minority. They're going to continue to be. Christian culture is being overrun and the churches were failing. And all the stuff about, she cited a lot of kind of anti-intellectual movements. I said, yeah, we have the skateboard preachers and the hip hop, but it's not going to overtake the rest of the culture. She did have one section that mentioned me. So let me greet everyone here. Patrick Alexander, greetings. Hope you had a nice 4th. I disagree, Josh. I'm sorry. I think the Earth is round and it orbits the sun. One Cow Stampede, greetings. Doki Doki, good to see you. Godzilla Freak, great to see you. One Cow, if I haven't said hello already. Patrick Alexander, if I haven't said hello already. Ray Giordano. So I'm on the East Coast, I happen to be a night owl. So late night really works well for me. There are people out, there are people throughout the USA that are on different time zones. So for the Midwest time zone, this would be like 10 o'clock. For the mountain, it'd be 8. Is that right? 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock for those on the West Coast. So greetings to everybody. Maybe there's someone in the Alaska time zone, which would be really cool. Well, I should hope so, Josh. I should hope so. So, let me see if there was... She had a chapter on me, and there were a lot of... in the chapter on evolutionary war. And there are inaccuracies. She was describing me as wearing jeans. I actually wore khakis. So, she misplaced the time of the interview. I believe it was in the summer. I think she mentioned the fall. Something like, it's been she said on a warm September evening at George Mason University. I believe it was July or August. I mean, it's been a long time, but there were like 20 things. I said, there's so many inaccuracies. I'm like, you're a journalist. You're supposed to get this right. She didn't get, when she was saying I had jeans, I was wearing jeans. I didn't own a pair at the time. And to this day, I don't like wearing jeans. That's just me. So I'll just read a little bit. On a warm September evening, and as I said, that's incorrect, at George Mason University, Virginia's largest public school, a pickup truck bearing 3 massive kegs pulls up outside the fraternity house. Nearby, the masthead of, so to speak, the campus feminist literary and arts journal gathers for meeting. In the economics department, computers hum in the offices of 2 Nobel laureates. And upstairs from a litter-strewn lounge in the colossal student center, an extracurricular seminar in intelligent design is in full swing. Salvador Cordova, the compact and animated young Philippine-American lecturing this evening, writes the equation on the whiteboard without explaining any of its mysterious symbols. And there's the equation. And I was referencing page 471 in Cosmological Anthropic Principle by Barrow and Tipler. Just for the record, Cosmological Anthropic Principle, page 471, Oxford University Press, 1987, just to be specific. Impressed murmurs issue from the lips of 25 people in the room. This is what's known as the God equation, Salvador explains to his students, grinning and tapping the whiteboard with a red marker, giddy with how totally cool it is to have this proof. And I've covered that in some of my talks. In my debate with James Downard, I pointed out one interpretation of quantum mechanics says that there is an eternal, omniscient, omnipresent being, conscious being, that is the ultimate observer. That is God. So yes, I was giddy. I'm still giddy whenever I hear that, when I ever ponder it. And okay, so she says, he fails to mention that it is an equation constructed entirely of variables. There are lots of things that are written in variables. It doesn't invalidate the truthfulness or the implication. So that was kind of a extension of Schrodinger's equation. It has variables in it. Doesn't make it something you can just interpret whatever way you want. Factor in 0 for any one of these symbols and you've got what could be known as the atheism equation. She doesn't understand the math. Not interested. As a journalist, that's inexcusable. Regardless, Salvador continues his lecture. Theology is truly a branch of physics. I wanted to cry when I saw theology, actually physics. I don't know if that was a misquote. She did not have a recorder. Let me just point this out. She is typing all these notes in. No, not typing. She was handwriting them. She could have used a recorder. Jeff Brumfield, who interviewed me for Nature, used a recorder. She did not. I never said, that's nothing I would think I would ever say, even back then. Theology being a branch of physics. Science may have been considered a branch of theology. So I don't think I ever said that. And since I studied physics, that's not a statement I'd make. I mean, I could show you my piles of physics book. There's not one physics book that says theology is a branch of physics. I wanted to cry when I saw this. This theorem proves you can never erase the need for faith. Okay. Some of the reviewers of this book said, she was interjecting her personal opinions. This was not journalistic standards. Okay. I'm just pointing out, it's so hard to even get through one paragraph without, little minor things, and then maybe not so minor things where she can't even. I mean, she's a woman. She's supposed to know clothing. I know that may sound sexist, but it's like, can you not distinguish between me wearing khakis versus jeans? Sorry. That might be funny that I would remember that, but I had mentioned before there was a young lady that we used to go to the clothing store. That was kind of a big deal that I really didn't like wearing jeans. So that's something I would remember. Salvador is leading the fall semester's first gathering at George Mason Idea Club, one of 30-plus campus chapters of the California Intelligent Design and Evolutionary Awareness Center. And then she also mentions Dr. Carolyn Crocker. A neat, sandy-haired woman wearing a cold cross named Carolyn Crocker enters the seat and seats herself in the remaining empty chair, sending whispers of recognition throughout the room. Crocker taught biology at George Mason until her department expressed concerns about her newfound enthusiasm for intelligent design. When she introduces herself, the room explodes with applause. I was the same as any other scientist, she tells the room, like a recovering addict in group therapy. Okay, this is not journalism, all right? This is not journalism to be describing Dr. Crocker that way, like a recovering addict in group therapy. It is humorous, though. I got to credit her that. I believe what I heard like the rest of them, but I picked up a book on intelligent design 5 years ago, and it explained to me, this is quoting Crocker, it explained to me the things about cell complexity that didn't make sense. It was the science which made me question what I knew. I took some time off and looked into embryology, and I came to the conclusion that we have to consider what we know, end quote. So that was Dr. Crocker. And now it's Lauren Sandler writing here. Intelligent design is the simple conceit that the world at both its most micro and macro, from the smallest creatures to the largest star systems, is so complex that it must have been created by, yes, an intelligent designer. Crocker's words are the wet dream of any promoter of intelligent design, the conversation story spoken in the professional language of science. So I'm not going to read the rest. She tried to, well, let me see. Maybe we'll cover this some other time. So I wasn't prepared to. Now I've got my interest to go through this. So anyway, that book, Righteous. Now I found something else digging through. I want you to see this graph here. I don't have it yet on the internet. Dr. John Sanford's genetic entropy. For those new, I work for Dr. John Sanford and still work with him, but no longer as an employee. Matter of fact, there may be one or two papers we're still trying to push, and the world might get surprised to see what the two of us publish. I'm deeply indebted to Dr. Sanford. While my mother was very ill and needed 24/7 care, he gave me a job where I could work from home. So that's my boss, Dr. John Sanford. He wrote the book Genetic Entropy. And there's this graph here. You see that? Declining fitness 1% per generation. We call this an exponentially decaying graph. That's one of his claims of, I just want you to note, I want people to also, if you don't know how to read graphs, it'd be good to learn how. Do you see how that, you have that sloping curve here? All right. Now, I found there is this researcher, Dr. Bryan Sykes. He wrote, I'm sorry for the, okay, that's the book cover. Okay, the British are a little bit, I guess they're not as prudish as the Americans, with nudity. So there's a picture, Dr. Bryan Sykes at Oxford University. Dr. Bryan Sykes at Oxford University. He is not a creationist, but he is a famous geneticist. And oh Lord, may it be that I find this. I'm going to be embarrassed because I thought I had this right at the bookmark. Ah, yes. So, people say genetic entropy is Dr. Sanford's invention. I want you to look at this graph. Does it look in shape very similar? What is the thesis of this book? 125, okay, I'm just going to read from the back cover. Dr. Bryan Sykes, 125 years from now, the human race will reach the ultimate evolutionary crisis that has been millions of years in the making, the extinction of men. And, you've seen Dr. Dan here on my channel. I treat him well, with a lot of respect. Two of us who are biology creationists, students of biology, but also creationists, myself and Emery Moyna, asked, we just had the rhetorical question, who would you rather have teach you biology? Kent Hovind, Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, or P.Z. Myers? Unanimously, we voted for Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. We respect him. Being a biology student and a creationist, you have to go to secular schools to learn biology. People that don't believe in creationism, and many of them that even reject the idea of God, we go there to learn about God's creation. Dr. Sanford, who I just mentioned, he paid my tuition to go to school. He said, I want you to go to this school, the NIH FAES graduate school, to learn biology. And there's no guarantee that they're going to, I doubt that any of them are creationists. He wanted me to go there to learn about God's creation. So, why did I bring Dr. Dan up in such a glowing light? I have to disagree with him. I had debated him and I said, Dr. Dan, do you think, I just gave you a list of all these geneticists, and one of the people listed was Bryan Sykes. I listed people like Michael Lynch and Gerald Crabtree and others, and I said, Dr. Dan, here's a list of people, and I said, how do you respond to that? This isn't our debate last year. And he said, that's argument from authority. You can look up the debate, so that wasn't quite a verbatim debate, but he used the word argument from authority. And I asked him point blank, I said, do you think the human genome's deteriorating? I don't think I got a straight answer. All right, so no disrespect to you, Dr. Dan, if you're watching this. But I just showed a graph here. This is a graph of infertility. Now you'll note the scale here. Dr. Sykes is predicting deterioration in about 7,500 generations, but He does give a time frame of 125,000 years. Now, the thing that is funny about this is if we're going to go extinct or at serious risk of extinction in 125,000 years, his reasons are the Y chromosome is not subject to recombination and what we call genetic recon. There are mechanisms to this. Basically, it's subject to Mueller's ratchet. That there's not any way for, once the Y chromosome is damaged, that line is going to maintain the damage. It never recovers. It doesn't mix. The most you could hope for is that it actually, the lineage goes extinct. And you hope someone has a good copy somewhere. But the problem is, at best, you can maintain a good copy. You're never going to improve. If there's been irreversible damage, it's going to stay. And he's concerned about that. But it's like, okay, if you're saying that we're going to go extinct in 125,000 years, how could we have been evolving in the first place for millions? So the creationist interpretation of genetic entropy is this is evidence for the genealogy of Jesus Christ, that we as humans emerged 6,500 years ago. That's the young life creationist argument. Strictly speaking, it doesn't have anything to say about the cosmos being young. It does say something about life being young for humans. We might try to extend that to other organisms, and I brought out some examples to him when I was at the NIH. I said, Dr. Sanford, my professor, who's the dean of the school, gave me this article on the fact that 15% of genes in domesticated grapes are gone. Now, depending on when the grapes got domesticated, that is a very interesting figure. 15%. Dr. Sanford said that's that's worse than he ever thought. 15% is a lot. And if these domesticated grapes were multiplied through cloning, that, that may or may not put some wrinkles in this. And there are other evidences, but I just wanted to point out, and no disrespect to my colleagues on the other side who've said nice things about me, but it's like, there comes a point when I have to disagree. Actually, there's lots of points when we have to disagree. They've been trying to say Dr. Sanford's views are fundamentally wrong. Okay, so let's even say, okay, why don't we go to the other guys? I mean, what are you going to do about Bryan Sykes here? He did a lot of work on mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. He was one of the pioneers. And he's the one that's saying we could go extinct. And this graph here in his book, as I said, looks hauntingly like this and other graphs. There's another graph in here. I don't know if I'll have time to. I'm taking a risk here because I don't know if I'll find another graph. It's a very powerful graph. This is also, you see that same curve there at the bottom graph. And let's see if there's another one. Ah, yes, the famous one. If we take the Bible and the declining ages of human beings in the Bible, it also creates that graph. So some people may wonder why I don't talk about genetic entropy that much. It's not worth arguing at this point. We're going to know. With the cheap genome sequencing we're able to do, we're going to know if we're deteriorating. No one is betting that we're going to be. I doubt anyone's going to say, good news, the human genome's improving. No one's going to say that. That's just, okay, that's a testable prediction. That's a testable prediction. So, I mean, let's just think about this a little bit, and this will relate to something Tom Holland. I'm going to talk about Tom Holland tonight. If the human race is going to go extinct in 100,000 years, how are we going to view ourselves and our accomplishments? What will we value? We know that the IQs are declining. it's of great concern. And if you saw me chuckle just now, I was just laughing. One of the reasons given actually was by evolutionary biologists. They said, well, smart girls don't seem to have as many kids as the not so smart girls. That's why I was laughing. We predict this will contribute to IQs declining. And I'm like, okay, so let's say we don't go extinct. What if we start to become all mentally enfeebled? We know we have very good evidence that human IQs have declined, and also mental stability. There's been an increase in autism. There's been an increase of all sorts of mental issues that were not as proliferous, abundant in past. Yeah. And to quote an internet atheist, some of you know who I'm talking about. He said, maybe we're all going to get dumber and dumber and lose our minds, and that, if that's what'll save the human race. Okay, I'm not going to show that highlight reel right now. So even someone else on the other side was saying that might be the case. How do we then live as a human race? I can only speak for myself at this point. I would get on my knees and say, Lord, may Jesus return quickly and redeem this situation. That's our hope. It's doubtful we're going to be able to re-engineer ourselves out of this problem, given the complexity of the genome. We can hardly fix our own problems and cooperate as a people. I'm not very hopeful, just looking at the signs, and I'm sorry to be pessimistic. But Jesus said, when all these bad things start to happen, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. So as we begin to realize the world is ending, and as we start to see signs, that's confirming what the Bible is teaching. Yes, I would love to see eternal progress. I'd love life to end happily ever after for each and every person that I love. But, we're faced with the facts. So I'm sorry to start on such a sad note. But that does tell me, why have Christians focused on this kind of gloomy picture of humanity? It's because it's evidence that the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Luke chapter 3 and Matthew 1 is accurate. That we are of miraculous origin. It also tells us that Adam sinned, therefore death and destruction came upon the world, that this world is under a curse. It's intelligently designed. Creationism is, the world is intelligently designed, but also cursed. It says in Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. We see evidence of intelligent design and the wrath of God, because we see this exquisite design that exceeds human technology, and one day I might share some more of that exceeds our ability. I was watching a video on sharks and their electric sensing, and being an electrical engineer, I've said this before, it exceeds our ability. In that video, which was a pro-evolution video, they said this is better than anything we can build. The nanovolts per meter capability of electric field sensing in sharks is better than anything any human device can detect. That's amazing. We have strong evidence of design, but then all of us feel the pains of everyday life. It is also cursed. Because a designer that could make something as fabulous as a shark, that designer could grant eternal life and happily ever after. We have evidences of creatures that live that are called quote unquote immortal, meaning like the Hydra. If you don't kill the Hydra, it doesn't age. It would never die. Just keep it fed or protected. It's going to live forever. We can kind of say the same of microbes like bacteria, but the Hydra is very interesting scientists are studying it. They're like, this is amazing. Why do we have this animal that can live forever? And yet we have death. And this is actually an outstanding question in evolutionary biology. Why do we age? Because it seems we have the capacity, many creatures, to live for much longer times. It's not that they will say this, but I will say this. It's as if something switched off the ability to self-repair and therefore prevent aging. So just some thoughts. So how did I come up with that list? Well, like a lot of things, I'll just see a book. I'm like, man, this was so interesting back then. I need to share it before I throw it back on the bookshelf. So I might cover a little bit more of that. So let's look at, now that we have about, goodness, 21 people watching. This is exciting. I wanted to say some people get upset with me because I'm friendly with Dapper Dino and Dr. Dan. I think, and this is going to relate to one of the topics later, it's good to dialogue with the other side. And as I said, Dr. Sanford spent money to pay evolutionists to teach me. There's a reason for that. They have the knowledge that God has equipped them for your benefit. Dr. Dan has knowledge that may be for your benefit. Strongly disagree. But I was sent to study under people like Dr. Dan. One reason I invited Dapper Dino, he's very critical of creationism. He never took it out on me personally, which I really appreciate. But the thing that surprised me, I said, you believe that the apostles were real. And you heard it here on Friday night. He said, he affirmed the existence of the, first it started with the church fathers, and I was really glad he was willing to affirm that. And he said, oh yeah, the apostles, they were real. He said, Jesus is real. And he said, okay, this is, and he went one step further. He said, the apostles believed Jesus rose from the dead. The apostles believed he rose from the dead. So from a historical standpoint, this whole thing about the apostles being a myth and Jesus being a myth, even someone like Dapper Dino, who runs a counter-creationist channel, is acknowledging the apostles were real, Jesus is real, and that the apostles believed Jesus rose from the dead. And so that raises the question, probably in people, that if they would accept those premises, did Jesus really rise from the dead? What I add to the conversation is, if we have a miracle of the origin of life, if humanity is young, that would tell me that the gospel accounts are trustworthy and divinely inspired. And if it says Jesus rose from the dead, I'm willing to believe it. Because it's obvious to me there's a power greater than any power in the universe that was responsible for creating life. And if that power created life the first time, that power is able to resurrect life. Very simple. And then it would also reinforce some of our personal experiences. We believe that, I know many of you listening have experienced answers to prayer, maybe even seen miracles, or you know people that have seen miracles. And fundamentally, where else will you go? Who else, as it says in John 6:68, where shall we go? You have words of eternal life. That is Peter speaking to Jesus. Paraphrasing that is, where else would you go? There are no answers in atheism. Even atheists have told me that. But if the apostles believed that Jesus rose from the dead, and that they spread the gospel that overtook an empire, I think that's also evidence that God's power was at work in their lives. There are so many religions out there. Why did Christianity overtake all others if it were not for the power of God? And then also, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that prove all the prophecies of the Messiah were written before the time of Jesus Christ. And for me, one of the most powerful ones is they said the Messiah would come, he would teach the people, he would teach the Gentiles about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that in him the Gentiles would hope. Can you name one Jew that has fulfilled that? The only name that is true of is Jesus Christ. He has taught the Gentiles about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Gamaliel said, when this little group of Christ's followers were being persecuted, he said, be careful. He told the Pharisees, be careful about what you're trying to do. They're trying to throw them in jail, maybe even have them executed. He said, be careful of that, because if this isn't of God, it's going to die out, this idea. But it is, if it is of God, nothing will stop it. Nothing will stop it. That inadvertent prophecy has also come true. And so has the prophecy of the Messiah teaching the Gentiles. That has come true. Thousands of years old prophecy. And so we have all these lines of evidences. It's not so strong that you can't, that that it'll force everyone to believe. It's strong enough that if you're willing to pursue the Lord, you can accept it. But if you're determined, like some atheists I know, or believers in other religions, if they're determined to close their eyes to it, God will make it really easy. So it is hidden just enough to make that possible. So just some thoughts, and let me see if I see anything. Oh, speaking of which, Dr. Dan is here. Just wanted to say hi. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you, Dr. Dan. It's great seeing you. And thank you very much for dropping in. So I'm just going to survey the comments here. Oh. Okay, yes, that's who it is. I have a recording of him saying maybe to save the human race, we're all going to get dumber and dumber and and we're going to all lose our minds. I never let him live that one down. And yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm trying to cut my I'm trying to cut my addiction to speed, all right? It's hard. Yeah, I'm addicted. I admit I looked for about 3 minutes just to see how many subscribers he had today. But I hadn't done that in about 3 days. So, okay. But yeah, I got a speed addiction here, I'm just like, I'm always so curious. It's like, see, I think I have 119 more subscribers than him. That kind of gives me peace of mind. But I really don't. Maybe it was like a week and a half ago I watched, because he had a whole special on me, this tortured mind of Sal Cordova. I'm like, dude, okay, if someone has a tortured mind and he's mentally ill, you don't do a whole show on them. That's kind of cruel, That's not. I don't look for mentally ill people to highlight on my YouTube channel. That's just not cool. But he's been doing this a long time, talking about my intelligence level and talking about what I don't understand. And now he's talking about my mental health. Okay. But since that time, about a week and a half ago, I just go over there to take a little look at how many subscribers he has. Okay, so that's rather petty. So yeah, that's my confession. I have a speed addiction there, but I'm trying to cut down. Okay. All right. So is this how we forgot the? to get to the moon. As long as humans are bright enough to read the Bible and understand the gospel, we have hope. After that, it might be a wrap. Yes, Hydra is a real animal. It's not just a mythological creature. And just to confirm what I said about Hydra's immortality, see if it's even on Wikipedia. There it is. There's a Wikipedia article on immortality. It's called Biological Immortality. So there's this Wikipedia article, Biological Immortality. And there you go, right there, the Hydra. And I should mention this, there's also, let's see if they have it. Ela? I don't know if you can barely see it. You can see where it's highlighted in orange, HeLa cells. We isolated cells in humans, a human named from a woman named Henrietta Lacks. It's really kind of it is a tragic story. She was a cancer victim, and they were just doing a routine, I guess, biopsy. When they took her biopsied cells, they found that they didn't die. They just kept reproducing. Granted, they're cancer cells and dysfunctional, but there's still those. She is, as HeLa the human being, she died, but her cell just keep reproducing. It doesn't age. It's an immortal cell line. And I'm just like, guys, they're little traces of what God did in Eden, both before and after the fall. The capacity to live forever was there, and it's been switched off. And kind of the evidence of that is, one, the HeLa cells, and then also creatures like Hydra. And biologists have wondered, well, why did aging come into play? The capacity for immortality is there because we see it in other creatures, and you have it there. That's the Wikipedia article on biological immortality. So food for thought. Instead, we are worrying about human extinction at this point. And that's not a John Sanford thing. That is a biological thing, and then sadly on so many other levels, we're now at the stage we have weapons powerful enough to annihilate the human race. And some goofball could just start a war that'll end the human race. We know that. And as far as I know, the nuclear stockpiles aren't diminishing in size. They're getting bigger. And more people are wanting them. I'm sorry to start on such a sad note. But we Christians have a hope, because our hope is not in this world. So I focus on evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. Evidence that there's a creator, and evidence that Jesus is who he said he was through archaeology. And I'm not going to be able to get through all the comments. Apologies in advance. All right, see, what else is on the docket. Michel Foucault. Now, Ravi Zacharias had a fall from grace because of his personal scandals, and we're family friendly here, so you know what I'm talking about. He had actually good material in criticizing postmodernism and kind of the cultural things. And one of the people he singled out was Michel Foucault. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And so I'm just going to read some isolated things from the wiki entry here. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Let me hang on one second. I had to turn off my microphone. Yeah, just a terrible cough from the allergies. Paul Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, historian of ideas, writer, political activist, and literary critic. This is where an atheistic viewpoint can lead someone in terms of, if there are no answers in atheism, your grounding in what you believe is right and wrong is up to your whims. And he's a perfect example of this. And it says in 1 Corinthians, if the dead are not raised, Christ is not raised, then let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. 1 Corinthians 15, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. There are no answers. Since there are no answers in atheism, you just live for whatever you can live for. It might not be, there's no universal standard for you or purpose. And Michel Foucault was one of the philosophers who basically followed through. And he wasn't the first by any means, but he does represent a certain view. And before I forget, I was listening to the book of Job. The book of Job, the phrase is used, multiply many words without knowledge. So that's an accusation where someone makes up a lot of talk and he doesn't know anything. Let's say hypothetically he knew that what we know now. Let's say he had read The Stairway to Life and realized maybe the chances of there being a creator are a lot better than he thought or was taught in school. And you'll see that with Tom Holland, I'm sorry. What would he do then? What about the archaeological finds we're finding? What about the stuff of genetic entropy that might suggest that the genealogy of Jesus Christ is actually accurate? Would he reconsider then? So instead what you do is you multiply words without knowledge because you don't know anything, you just make stuff up. And God did rebuke Job and said, who is this that darkens counsel and darkens counsel without knowledge? And so this is darkening. This is really, that was just a mild rebuke because the Lord really did love Job a lot. It said, hey, you don't have everything quite right there. All right. But Michel Foucault is an example of someone. It's like, okay, he's an atheist. It said that later in the wiki article. How do you live your life? There are no answers in atheism to tell you how to live your life. So he just makes up stuff. So let's see what he made up. And I'm not, oh goodness. I'm going to skip a lot of this. Okay, you're seeing tons and stuff. Okay, multiplying words without knowledge. You could just see all huge amount of writings. I'll just skip to some paragraphs. Foucault died in Paris from complications of HIV/AIDS. He became the first public figure in France to die from complications of the disease. His partner, Daniel Defer, founded the AIDS charity in his memory. Okay, so let's skip his early life and his studies. So let's see if we can get, goodness, this wiki article is just unbelievably long. Okay, what did I say about multiplying words without knowledge? I'm gonna make piles and piles of assertions that ultimately are baseless. If there's a God, all of this is wrong. If there's a God, all of this is wrong. I mean, if there's a Christian God in particular, all of this is wrong. All this pile of writing and the people affected, it's wrong. Just think about that. And goodness, it's not, you could tell, I'm sorry to be dismissive here, but personally, I'm not going to waste time on this too much. But you talk about just spinning your wheels, going in a direction that's just, in the end, is wrong. And I'll wager that he's wrong. Okay, so people say you don't know that for sure. It's like, okay, we'll find out on Judgment Day who's right. Um, Goodness, he just wrote so much. Um, let's see. Let's see. Okay, this is the it said at the time Foucault engaged in homosexual activity with men whom he had encountered in the underground Parisian gay scene, also in indulging in drug use. According to biographer James Miller, he enjoyed the thrill and sense of danger that these activities offered him. So I, I see that temperament because I was briefly a professional. I see people just going for the thrill. They just love gambling. The ultimate gamble is wagering everything. That ultimate gamble of wagering just everything. And so we have these thrill seekers, these daredevils, they get a big rush. Now, the people that are very successful in casino gambling have the opposite temperament. I hated when I had to push out the bet. The math said, now you push that big bet out, you have a 55% chance of winning. Well, technically the term is expected value, and a 45%, something like that. I think most you'll have a 5% advantage over the house in high counts. And so you knew that there was still like a 47% chance you're going to lose that bet. I did pushing out the money. People with a gambling temperament, they just get a thrill out of wagering things. Those aren't the people that end up being very successful, sad to say. It's the ones that make more calculated risks. But he was getting a thrill for this. But if you're an atheist, what do you live for? I mean, what's one decision to not gamble or gamble? Um, he had that thrill, the danger of the drug use, and then the promiscuity. And it talked about the article uh, talked about his let's see, he was advocating. I know this is a family friendly channel, but well, I guess this stuff is even getting out to the kids in public schools anyway, so it's going to be mentioned. Foucault was a proponent of adult child underage sex and pedophilia, considering them a form of liberation for both actors. He argued children could give sexual consent. Okay, so all right, so maybe that's enough of that. I mean, if you're really interested, you could read about this guy. But I just wanted to say, when I read that autobiography, I said, that's nothing I want. I want eternal life with our Creator. To be just getting thrills by endangering your life, that's just not for me. The drug use and whatever else. I want to live for something more than let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. More than just indulging, just trying to find something to make us feel better in this life. I mean, it's great if we can feel better, if we could find meaning in something beautiful. That's totally glorious. I mean, it mentioned Foucault liked classical music. I didn't share his taste. He liked the Baroque stuff. You could tell I like the Romantic era stuff and post-Romantic. But when I read that biography, I said that totally does not appeal to me. Spending your time multiplying words without knowledge and it could be all for naught. And even in the atheistic worldview, it is all for naught. Bertrand Russell pointed that out. The universe is going to burn out. What's it all going to amount to in the end? One would only endeavor to do, pursue creating all these writings because it makes you feel better, but that's about all where it stands. So the next one is Tom Holland. Tom Holland is really incredible. Now, I provided a YouTube link to his 2-hour interview. It's grueling. I had to just watch it in pieces because he's like me. He just can do a monologue for a long time until his voice quits. And he was saying that he was re-examining his views as a liberal, meaning he felt that he got inherited all of his values from the Enlightenment. And then as he examined the basis of the Enlightenment, he realized that was really a reset of Christian ideas. I found that interesting. Now, I'm not a student of the Enlightenment, and I know many people would disagree with him, but he was looking back at all the values. And though I would be reluctant to say that Christianity was necessarily causal for a lot of these, many of the values of the Enlightenment were nicely parallel to Christian values, even though it rejected Christianity. So that was very interesting. He said the Enlightenment tried to reject superstition and Christianity, but there were some core beliefs there. And he was pointing out that the value of the individual was very special in Christianity. The other thing is the hope, that eternal hope that the oppressed would eventually be the victors. And he said, Jesus Christ is that picture. Here's that someone who is hung to a Roman cross. That's a Christian theme, that the one who is most oppressed, the most innocent person being oppressed, will be the victor in the end. So that's the Christian theme. Christianity has moved forward because it's like, okay, no matter how badly the Roman emperor or whatever tyrannical government is weighing you down, they will not prevail in the end. That is a Christian value. He said what happened at the Black Lives Matter movement, and listen carefully to what he says about Black Lives Matter, because at first it sounds like he's pro Black Lives Matter, but in the end, he'll criticize it. He said, it's rooted in Christianity, but not anchored in it. And what he was saying is they had the theme of the oppressed trying to become unoppressed. But the difference in the Black Lives Matter versus true Christianity is the Christians, they truly believe the oppressed will prevail. Those who've been unjustly punished, unjustly suffering, will prevail, just like Jesus Christ prevailed on the cross. That the good guys will basically win in the end. I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, forgive me. That's kind of my paraphrase. But it's great. You'll hear it. And you're just like, oh my goodness, he's seeing this so clearly. You see, the Black Lives Matter, what do they resort to? All the violence and anger and rage. Because fundamentally, they're afraid. They're afraid that they're not going to win. Not to mention a lot of it's illusory anyway. I mean, there's not systemic. The condition of that demographic group is not because of systemic racism. There's racism in America, but I'd argue that's not the primary cause for the condition for the inequality between African Americans and other demographic groups. It's more complex than that. It's not inherently, racism is only a small portion of that. There's some things that maybe people don't want to raise the issues. I'll let people like Thomas Sowell, who's African American, and Larry Elder address that. Of course, you may not like what you hear. But in any case, in any case, he was saying you could see the rage because they're afraid. They're really afraid that utopia is not going to happen on Earth. Whereas the Christians always had that hope. There's that scene in the movie Quo Vadis, great theme, great movie, where the Emperor Nero is sending the Christians before the lions, and the Christians start singing. Nero is just like, can't believe it, because the Christians are about to be received in glory. And now this is Hollywood and fiction, that St. Peter walks into the Colosseum and says, Christ will live forever. Christ will reign, will be king. Nero will pass away. Nero was offended. But you see, that's the Christian hope. That Christ the king, he's the oppressed, will become the victor. He will reign. And that offended the Nazis also. They're always about strength and power. The idea that they could not subjugate certain groups with their power is offensive to the Nazi mentality. And Tom Holland covers that. And he also talks about how the democracy of Greece is not the same, democracy began in Greece, but it's not the same conception that we had in the USA or other countries that was based on the belief that we're created in God's image. And you could tell he's a really good scholar in these areas. Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with everything of his assessment. It's very interesting what he said. He said, I've adopted the Christian viewpoint. In fact, so he's an atheist as of now. So let me just Wikipedia entry. And this is very fascinating because it's going to tie to some other things, to the Homeschool Mom Project, which I will find. Now, I just found out as Googling is, there's several Tom Hollands. There is a Tom Holland, the actor. I'm going to go for the historian. See if I can get Tom Holland, FRSL, the Royal Society of Literature. So he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And let me activate this here. So this is what he has to say. Familiarity with the biblical narrative of the crucifixion has dulled our sense of just how completely novel a deity Christ was. So let me back up here. What he's saying is, in the West, that account is so familiar to us, we take it for granted. But if you look at it from a historical standpoint, it was a big deal. Familiarity with the biblical narrative of the crucifixion has dulled our sense of just how completely novel a deity Christ was. Christianity is the principal reason why, by and large, most of us who live in post-Christian societies still take for granted that it is nobler to suffer than to inflict suffering. It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian. And it's very interesting that he's saying, he doesn't know what else to do, because he thinks that these are the values he holds dear, but he doesn't have any foundation except faith to believe them. And then he relates how he was growing up, he was raised in the church. Why did he reject it? He said he read Genesis and it didn't agree with what he was learning in the science classes. He said Genesis doesn't agree with science. And I was thinking, he's at a beautiful point if he can find the truth and see that science actually, if we talk about science in terms of observations, fact, and real theory, if we're talking about theory in terms of chemistry and physics and statistics, I think the evidence is much stronger in favor of the Christian God than he's giving it credit for. I would hope, and I sincerely hope, that he will find it, that he'll begin to consider when he sees the design in the world and the failed explanations by Darwin, that he'll attribute that to the Christian God. So there is hope then that we are made in the image of God by a creator God. Let him consider that. So the conflict between Genesis and mainstream science eroded his faith. Otherwise, he's on board. As it says here, in my morals, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian. It's his scientific views that are holding him back. So that's why I found this really compelling, really compelling. Now, let me go to another example that I was thinking on this, and we'll get to the homeschool project, hopefully. Yes, there was this article in the Gospel Coalition, and I quoted it here. Rhett, and this is an article I wrote, but then I was quoting another article from the Gospel Coalition. Rhett, a member of the entertainment duo Rhett and Link, whose net worth is now $23 million, began his loss of Christian faith because of questions relating to science and the age of the earth and evolution. Now, let me point out something about Rhett and Link here. They were on staff with Campus Crusade. At least one of them were Campus Crusade for Christ. They lost their faith. So they said, the loss of faith, questions relating to science, the age of the earth, and evolution. That was a single sentence in a generally powerful article about how two celebrity ex-Christians, ex-missionaries, who became apostate and then became rich. In the articles in the Gospel Coalition, I put the link in the video channel there. I just commented, this is my comment here. Who they are now is between them and God. We creationists can't do for people what only God and they themselves must do. But we can equip ourselves with the best arguments for creationism available. Keep looking for more and trust the Lord for revealing more evidence for the creationist case over time. In Proverbs 25:2, it says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out a matter." And I just had some more comments where I was saying, why don't I just read it since we're there? Sometimes the evidence we wish we had were available today. That is by design, as God hides some of it for his glory and for the glory of those who seek to find it. Looking at the creation-evolution controversy over the last 100 years, one can see that the amount and quality of evidence for the creationist case has grown immensely with time, and it inspires faith that this trend will continue. The creationist case wasn't as good 100 years ago as it is today. It might be fair to say what we have today might seem weak compared to the case we might have if the Lord delays his return 100 years from now. Is it worth risking one's soul, one's eternal future, for a speculative theory like evolution that becomes a more absurd faith belief with every passing hour? There is no salvation in the name of Charles Darwin. And let me just scan some of the side chat comments briefly. One count Stampede. I've never met any atheist that could steelman a Yek argument. it's always such an angsty, cartoonish, simplistic straw man. And there's stuff about the Catholic Church. And Ray Giordano says, atheists run across things in the Bible they don't get and conclude it's stupid. They never bother to try to understand any of it. And it does echo a passage in the Bible. It is foolishness to those who are perishing. The Bible, God's message to the world, is foolishness to those who are perishing. Actually, let me see where that verse is. Foolish to those. Wouldn't you know, it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And just off the top of my head, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, that's by design, because God is going to make these people look foolish in the end. If they don't repent, it's to God's glory that these people that were railing against him and saying it's stupid, the joke will be on them. Because it says in 1 Corinthians, God chose the despised of the world to shame the wise, to shame the powerful. So, yes, to some extent, people who, well, it says it in the Bible, it'll seem like foolishness to them because they are the ones that are perishing. And we'll get to some tough questions. And they're actually, questions I've had, and I think a lot of believers have had, where you could think something's not like, what, it's like, God, why did you do that? So that is Tim Holland. And, that it's heartening to see someone who could see so clearly that there are no answers in atheism. That's another way of saying it. We derive our moral fabric from Christianity. He could see it. He could see it as an atheist himself. The moral values we have in the West now, in the post-Christian West, we've still inherited it from our Christian past. And I think this is in the video. If I'm wrong, apologies in advance. He's saying we've had experiments. We've seen what happens when you erase Christianity. We see the result of that. And I think he even referenced Nietzsche, that he's predicting this is what would happen to a society that lost its Christian roots. And he's pointing to things like the Soviet Union and other totalitarian regimes that actively tried to erase Christian roots and the rights of an individual. And he's kind of like in a difficult spot where it's like, well, he has no basis except faith to accept these things. Proudly a Christian in that sense, but an atheist in the sense it doesn't agree with his understanding of science. Maybe when we're off the air, I'll say a prayer for him. Maybe we can collectively, because he's so close. He gets it. He gets it. I wish a lot of Christians in the pew, God bless them, I wish they would have that level of appreciation for Christian heritage. I didn't have it. I'm beginning to learn it. Because I focus so much on science and other things, but it's beautiful to see, what we live for, our sense of purpose, our ethics, our laws, our morals. So much inherited from Christianity. I took it for granted. And, come to think of it, I couldn't believe all the cultures he studied. So, and then I talked about Rhett and Link. They began to have questions about the age of the earth and creation. Now, I don't know where they are on that. First off, bad on them that they didn't pursue this a little more carefully. But I can tell you this is why, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pick on some people. You have to have A+ arguments. As a creationist, you have to present to the world A-plus arguments. Just because someone's a brother in Christ does not mean you're going to reference everything they say. Does anyone have a problem with me saying that? Just because someone claims to be a Christian doesn't mean that I approve of the quality of their science or their arguments. And frankly, me, if I say something wrong that's unscientific, not consistent with observation and evidence and things we can experiment, I hope someone would correct it. I really hope someone will say, Sal, you got that one wrong. This is the right number. Is that wrong to point out? It says in Proverbs, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. Reprove a fool and he'll hate you. And I got to do some things that are not so pleasant. I have to point out, there's a reason I have a lot higher respect for Dr. Dan's biology knowledge than Ken Hovind. Because some of the stuff he said, I would be horrified if creationists were using those arguments. I was being cajoled to say, oh, you're not going to be able to defeat Dapper Dino in a debate. Go study Kent Hovind. I'm just like, dude, you got to be kidding. People wrote me and said they thought I did a very good job against T-Jump and Dapper Dino, that I held my own. I didn't reference anything when I hear some of his arguments, it just makes me cringe. Do I have to be specific? There are all these videos by Thunderfoot that just pretty much tore it apart. And I tried to tell some of the younger creationists, don't let them be your role model. It's just not. It's not going to help you in your science understanding. So what literature would be good for a creationist, a serious student of creationism, to get acquainted with? The Stairway to Life, Change Tan and Rob Stadler. Harvard PhDs. Yes, it's hard reading. Doing good science is not easy. Okay, I'm sorry to get on my soapbox here and get a little animated. Doing good science is not easy. It's going to be more than just some being able to do theater on a debate and then you don't have substance. And you've also, on top of that, probably said some things that are not accurate scientifically. Change Tan's Stairway to Life, Change Tan and Rob Stadler. And we've had stuff on Stairway to Life here. You don't see me highlight any of Hovind's stuff. There's a reason for that. I'm sorry to just... And someone was saying, oh, don't lay your hand on God's anointed. I'm just like, dude, he said something wrong. I don't want to be teaching the next generation wrong stuff. And he does it consistently wrong. And I want to point out something ironic. He's willing, whoever that commenter was, said, okay, so you're willing to criticize me. You're not willing to criticize him. Don't you see the irony of that? It seems like in his book, it's fair to criticize me, but it's not fair for me to criticize another brother. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. If it says, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you, that's very interesting, because that means God can regard someone as wise, but that wise person can still be mistaken. He can still get it wrong. A good man can still be mistaken and get it wrong. He needs a brother to come and set it right. And if stuff is flowing to the next generation that's just wrong scientifically, you got to get it straight. So going back to Rhett and Link, and this goes to the Homeschool Mothers Project, I don't know what their sources were, but let's say they were lousy creationist arguments. You could see that they'll begin to think, oh my goodness, no one leveled with me. This stuff was either made up or it's faulty, and they'll feel lied to. Now, it's still on them that they left the Christian faith. It's still on them. That's between them and God. I'm not going to try to, I think now, looking back at my essay, it's like, we can say, oh, you really didn't love the Lord, or you didn't do this or that. That's not my place to judge. what their motives are. God knows what their motives are and where their heart really was. But the point is, if I had a chance to talk with them, I said, so are you gonna accept the garbage of abiogenesis over what you would read in Stairway to Life? I mean, is that what you're going to throw your soul over? What Dave Farina has to say? Are you going to throw away your soul because of the kind of nonsense that someone like Dave Farina would spew? And sadly, a lot of the Origin of Life community, not that they would ever pay any attention to me. It's like, okay, is that worth your soul? I mean, did you ever compare what you taught now that James Tour's come out and criticized the abiogenesis industry? Are you going to reconsider Mr. Rhett and Mr. Link? How about some elements of evolutionary theory? Dr. Change Tan may be having another book in the works. If I can find the energy to do it, I'd probably even help her write parts of it that deal with eukaryotic evolution. Like I hope some of you saw my debate with James Downard, and I was criticizing eukaryotic evolution. He thought he had me with endosymbiotic theory, and I was quoting off papers from memory there. I was saying, hey, you don't got that right. And then I was showing like the nuclear pore complex. I don't think any creationist watching that would think he made a convincing case that eukaryotes evolved naturally. So I'd just say, if you're, I've gotten criticized. It's like, Sal, is it your way or the highway? I'm just like, no. I've recommended books. Change Tan, Rob Stadler. If you can suffer through that intellectual rigor, you're well equipped to start. And yes, horrifying as it might sound, that's just the start. Okay, guys? Even for myself, that would be the start. I need to go read that book and suffer through it maybe 2 or 3 times and really grasp it. And so I've had these shows trying to actually learn some of the principles and get criticized and say, okay, maybe I overplayed my hand there, but I'm still right. So there you have it. Are there other books with the age of the earth? And I'm just going to level you. I've gotten flack for this. I said, for Origin of Life, claiming a miracle, I think the creationists have got that one. The ID proponents, even the ones that believe in universal common ancestry, but believe the first cell was a miracle of God. And Sygart's kind of at that stage, not quite. You can hear he was on my after show. I think he said, scientifically, I can't prove it. I think he said, personally, not speaking as a scientist, I think it was, life, and I believe he's referring to the first life from which everything evolved. That had to be a miracle. He said, but I can't prove that scientifically, so he pursues the science. I totally get that. Someone who's a careful thinker will pursue very carefully various lines of thought. And so I wish Dr. Gart the best. Now, he does not believe the earth is young, but it's still a big start that he's realizing that the incredible difficulty of the natural origin of the first life. So I've said on this channel, the real quote unquote battle, and it's not a fierce one really, is between the old earth progressive creationists, like say Stephen Meyer, whom I admire immensely, and then the young earth creationists. I've talked to a lot of old earth creationists, and privately they said, if you can give me the observational and theoretical evidence that the earth is young, I'm on board. And I know that because I've been there, done that. That being said, I think there are challenges in the model of young cosmos and young earth. For young cosmos, the biggest problem is the distant starlight problem. And I can say that because I've been to these young earth cosmology conferences, they can't agree on a mechanism. So the irony is we are looking, all of us are on board saying miracle, origin of life. The irony is, solving the distant starlight problem, we're appealing to naturalistic rather than miraculous mechanisms. All of us, myself included, say we want a naturalistic explanation for the distant starlight problem. And maybe I'll do a show on this, why it's desirable to have a naturalistic explanation. One of the reasons is it has more force. If you can show that the speed of light somehow gets here very quickly, that's a very forceful argument. Even if you're not a young earth creationist, you'll have to contend with that. It'll just blow away all the atheistic models. So that's the irony, is we are actually looking for a naturalistic solution to the problem of distant starlight. All the young earth creationists I know of, except maybe one small camp that talk about created light on the way. But most of the models are attempting to solve it naturalistically, and that makes it far more difficult than just accepting a miracle for the origin of life. So I'm just setting this up. That's why I said the model isn't quite there, not ready. We can make some, if I were in a debate, I just have to say I accept the distant starlight problem as a matter is solved by, as I accept that God has solved it as faith. There is an answer for it. I just don't know it yet. Whereas I'll emphatically say life originated by a miracle, and we can defend that by many scientific arguments, starting with probability and then also the tendency of evolution to give that. You saw that devolutionary curve? Maybe I'll call it that exponentially decaying curve that I showed in Adam's verse and in other places. We can make that argument. We can defend it. We're not quite at that stage for distant starlight. Technology, we're getting better, but we still have, there are problems with radiometric dating that we've been able to demonstrate, but we still have some problems in radiometric dating, like the intermediate age isotopes that hasn't come to satisfying resolution. And then we have problems with models of accelerated nuclear decay. And even Eugene Chafin has pointed out, if we invoke one kind of accelerated nuclear decay, which would be what they call kind of all over the universe, the proper term is isotropic. How did humans not die? Because then all the potassium isotopes would create so much radiation, we should die. And I'm like, yeah, okay, these are some serious problems, guys. And again, the reason it's so challenging is we're trying to find naturalistic explanations. We'll accept miracles for special creation. We want naturalistic explanations for geology, naturalistic explanations for distant starlight, and lots of cosmology. We believe the stars were miraculously created, same for the solar system. But the light travel problem, to do it in less than 10,000 years, we want a naturalistic explanation. So this is going to be a very interesting. I was just realizing that I might have to do a show on that. So why am I saying that? I said, okay, Rhett and Link, if I'm dealing with them, I'll say, absolutely, there are doubts, but it doesn't mean that it's immediately false. But I'll level with you, because I don't want you going away and I give you some half-baked model and you find out it's false. Jonathan Sarfati confronted me on an intelligent design blog, and he's calling all these people that are having doubts. At the time, I was halfway between old Earth and young Earth. I was saying, you guys are compromisers. And it's just like, dude, the problem with the distant starlight model. He said, John Hartnett came out with the Carmeli cosmology. And at the time I was thinking, no, this is not going to work. Shortly thereafter, I actually did meet John Hartnett. He wanted me to be a PhD student because I was studying physics with Johns Hopkins, and he was inviting me to study with him in Australia. And I ended up with Dr. Sanford studying biology instead. John Hartnett withdrew his Carmeli cosmology. So Jonathan Sarfati was giving me something that eventually failed. And that's what I was saying. You don't give students stuff that isn't ready for prime time. You tell them maybe it's speculative. We haven't solved all the problems. They can deal with that. If you give them something that they put their hopes in and then it's falsified, they can feel that they've been handed a raw deal. So it's perfectly fair to say, just level with them, tell them, this is what I believe. We don't have all the evidence in hand. You don't go out there and say, look at this Carmeli cosmology, and it's not been tested. And like I said, it got withdrawn. Now, granted, and this goes to the homeschool thing. Granted, you'd like to be able to tell your kids, we can explain everything, but we can't. You can't win. You'd like to say we have evidence that proves everything in the Bible. It's like, we're not there, but we're getting more. And that's just being honest. I would rather you just be straight up with them and say, maybe someday God will provide the evidence you're looking for, than to make something up that's just not true, that is not well studied, and then they find out they've been given a raw deal. I've been generously invited by Dapper Dino to appear on his channel to criticize the creationist argument that has made the circle, the rounds, talking about the second law of thermodynamics, and just like, it's not right. And not only that, what's worse, privately, a lot of ID proponents and creationists said, yeah, we don't use the second law of thermodynamics as an argument against the origin of life or evolution of life. I'm just, how many times have I heard this, and yet it's still being circulated around by a number of people? It's just not right. Now, my only criticism of the Stairway to Life is it talked about it just once. I said, can you delete that sentence? I don't know what they did, because they had me as a reviewer. I flagged that one immediately. I don't know if it's still there. And there is a subtlety here, which Godzilla Freak, see, he corrected something, an omission there. Second law is a good cosmological argument, not a very good one, not a very good biological one. Thank you. Thank you. And see, there are problems with Lyell's hypothesis, in my opinion. Okay, and I could be wrong. I'll throw out my criticisms of it, and then also maybe some misunderstandings of what's been heard. I mean, I did this on peaceful, on hostile, on the hostile pseudoscience website, Swami Das's, Benedict Arnold's website, and let's see. I may cover some of my criticisms of Jason Lyell's theory. I'd have to go back, but this is Stairway to Life is a piece of cake compared to trying to argue relativity. I'm not trying to demean it, but this stuff is just miserably difficult. And right now, and I was at International Conference of Creationism, and some of us were like, they're not going to get anything agreed upon because we just don't have the data. Right now, we are multiplying a lot of words without knowledge because we don't have enough observations. We could settle a lot if we knew more. There may be experiments that could, in principle, help us, and there are experiments that have probably had people are ignoring. But I mean, okay, I'm going to just show you what I have to go through when I'm pondering relativity. This is an equation This is actually trying to recapitulate my first day of graduate school's homework assignment. My first day of graduate school, this was my homework assignment. They said, take Maxwell's equations and show Lorentz invariance using the DLM version. I'm just like, oh yeah. And the professor helped me because a lot of us didn't, know this. He said, just use, okay, he said, I'll get you started. Now you use your freshman calculus to get through the rest. And this was just miserable. I mean, this is what one has to go through to begin to grasp. And in this, I see a problem with Jason Lyle's one-way speed of light. Some of the claims of it not being able to measure it, even when John Hartnett was saying that, I said, time out, guys. I don't think what you're saying is right. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right, but these are discussions that are not going to be trivial, okay? It was just beautiful seeing James tour. He just tore down Dave Farina. Maybe, in Immutable Destiny said there are probably better ways he could have done it. And, but that is kind of funny. Immutable Destiny was saying he probably could have presented it. It's like, yeah, but, his point really still stands on a lot of issues, on a lot of them. One of them being the purity issue. But I'm just saying this is not easy. You level with your Christian brothers and tell them, how well is this established? And if it's not well established, you tell them that. You have a responsibility, and you're trusting the Lord might show it. So, yes, he might. Saul might be too strong a statement. To that end, someone who actually really does know relativity very well. He's worked for NASA. He's a young Earth creationist who worked for NASA. He won numerous awards. He's published in the Physical Review Letters. I don't believe Lyle was published in the Physical Review Letters for his work on relativity. This guy was. Philip W. Dennis. And when he spoke, he gave his alternative explanation. And I just remember there was something there with trigonometric hyperbolic functions and stitch in time relativity solutions to Einstein's field equations. Yeah, it was going over my head and just about everyone else's head, but we all universally recognize this guy knows what he actually knows what he's talking about. He's published it. Just the way he talked, we knew. Instant respect. Just pointing that out. So some of these, what unfortunately happens in the young Earth community, the theory that prevails is the one who gets marketed better, not necessarily the one that has the best technical content. P.W. Dennis, he really knew relativity better than anyone. When I was at the 2008 conference 10 years earlier, it was kind of a little disturbing that there may be 2 or 3 guys in that whole room, maybe the whole creationist community that studied general relativity. Shortly thereafter, I was one of the few. I'm just like, that's not good because I know squat. I don't know squat. I mean, I have my do I have it here? Let's see if I have my general relativity book handy. No, I think I already brought it to my upstairs library. I don't know. I mean, I studied it, but okay, I got an A in the class. It doesn't mean I really understand it. So just throwing that out there, guys. So, so where were we? Okay, just to revisit. Okay, so I'm just saying, you level with people. Even if Hovind is God's anointed to share, if his science is wrong, he ought to love the fact that people are correcting his science, because some of it's bad. I've seen, okay. You can't let that stuff go. And so I've said my piece. What I think is good, grade A stuff, A+ stuff. Start with Stairway to Life. You will see grade A creationist ID arguments there. Rob Stadler is a young earth creationist, so is Changed Hand. I just want to say, you want to make university grade arguments that'll stand up relatively well, that's the book. And then Changed Hand's criticisms of evolution, if they come out, she's written a few articles critical of eukaryotic evolution. And I said, how about, have you done any stuff on mitosis or meiosis? She said, oh, that's way down in the works too. So there's stuff that's coming out, okay? And some are like, Sal, you're picking on him. I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm going to pick on either Kent or Eric. Eric Hovind, okay, it's not good when the father publicly says he's suing his son. That doesn't reflect very well on Eric Hovind. Why would your father sue you? There's dispute over property there, publicly. Kent Hovind is suing his own son. So someone is wrong here. This doesn't look good. Kent is in his third marriage. The optics don't look good. And now there's someone named Stephen Peterson, not my style. And I linked to a sermon, a clip of a sermon he was giving that SFT apparently really liked, and uploaded it, called that fiery preaching. It's like, okay, it's not, personally, that's not my style. But he was on a tirade against Eric Hovind. That video got taken down. He just absolute tirade for a whole hour, talking about what an ungodly, evil man he was. And then he was tearing into Kent Hovind's first wife. I'm like, oh boy. I had a link to that video. It's been since made private. But let me see. Did I link to it? No, I couldn't. But there's still something a little disturbing on the government side in their treatment of Stephen, what was his name again? Steven Anderson. Is that he's been banned in 30 countries for hate speech. And it's just like, okay, hate speech is wrong, but I'm committed to free speech. They wouldn't let him travel to these countries, even on a connecting flight. He'd be banned. And that kind of bothered me, that they could start labeling evangelicals just for believing in Jesus Christ as promoting hate speech. Our freedoms could be restricted. So let me just read this about Steven Anderson. So I preface all that his style is not mine. The way he was tearing into Kent Hovind's wife and Eric Hovind, I'm just like, dude, that was... All right, I'm a sweet guy, just not my style, all right? But protract, he is entertaining. Yeah, no kidding. If you like that sort, if you like ultimate fighting and MMA, oh yeah, entertaining in that sense. And so let me show. Yeah, and Wikipedia did. You see that look on Steven Anderson's face? That's him on that's his happy look. Okay. But he has been banned from many countries, including Jamaica, Canada, the Schengen area, whatever that is, which is made up of 22 of the 27 European Union countries, Republic of Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. So he's banned from these countries for promoting hate speech. Now, I don't like hate speech. But there's a principle that the way to fight hate speech is with good speech. You fight, if it really is hate speech, then you use reason and evidence to fight it, not government control. Because then a tyrant can come in and then call good people who are actually telling you the truth and call good people as promoters of hate speech. So if I started to cite biological evidence for certain things, and you know what I'm talking about, I can't do that because that's hate speech. You know what I'm talking about, because I'm having to be more careful and guarded here on YouTube now because of what's happening for what I'm hearing of all the deplatforming. And it's in the works that I might have to move to another platform, because just identifying as an evangelical could get me deplatformed. But now when I learned about what they're doing to Steven Anderson, they could do it to us. And you know, it's okay. You think I'm just defending him? What about Heather Heying? I had a show, a variety show that had Heather Heying, evolutionary biologist, who with her husband sued Evergreen State University for some issues in their treatment. But now an evolutionary biologist is getting banned for I don't know exactly what. But she's critical of, she's critical of people that would be considered left. And even though she identifies herself as someone on the left of the political spectrum, she sounded awfully like a lot of my evangelical colleagues when she's commenting on the problem modernism is introducing. So I don't know what it was that caused to ban her, but they got after her husband, Brett Weinstein, who's like uh, right there left with Hillary Clinton, and he suffered retribution from the university because he was teaching class. That sound funny? You're a university professor teaching evolutionary biology and biology whatever, and you get banned. You're singled out as a racist because you taught class on a day when all white people were supposed to have left, to show respect for black people by not going to work that day. They're expected to boycott the school and make, so they could have like some sort of day where there are no white people on the university. And he said, well, students paid to have me teach them. I hired to teach them. I'm going to teach my biology class. He was called a racist for that. So I'm very concerned about free speech rights. If they're going to go after an evolutionary biologist, a left-wing evolutionary biologist, for teaching his classes, they can go after Christians. So, all right. So, I'm not gonna pick a fight over preaching styles in this discussion. Just like a lot of things, I'm just reading and reading, and you find things that will just stand out. So the thing that did stand out when I was really trying to connect Steven Anderson's criticism of Eric Hovind, and then that video got deleted, what did stand out was him getting banned from travel. I mean, are Christians going to start to be banned to travel interstate? Who knows what they can do? So, in any case, enough of that. So now the next thing is the Homeschool Moms Project. So this past Sunday, I was at a church cookout. That was real fun. No, elder group. Each elder has like a little, what they call a flock or a community group It's their prayer group. They're about anywhere from, depending on the night, anywhere from 7 people to 40 people will attend the prayer meeting. And so we were having a July 4th celebration, and it was very blessed. It was great hanging out with the elders and just seeing them kick back, drinking beer. I drank a beer. It was, and they said, "What kind of beer?" Nothing too bitter. So they gave me a wheat beer. I think that's the first time I ever drank wheat beer. Now I don't process alcohol well. Some people start to get high and happy. It just makes me sick. That's why I would never want to. It doesn't have an effect on my psyche that would make me addicted. There are probably things that could be addictive, and I pray I'll never get so sick that I'll need to take morphine, because I think I could really like morphine. Okay, because one time I had a dental procedure, they gave me something that was an opiate. I'm just like, oh, I wish I could feel like this all the time. Alcohol does not have that effect on me, and I don't like the taste of beer. I like dessert wines, for the record. And some of the guys will light up tobacco, and I thought that was cool. Okay, so we're not going to be legalistic, and I know that they love the Lord. So it was just fun seeing us just enjoy a cookout, and the guys drinking beer, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of manly. I like seeing that. That's just me. You might be glad to hear that. Okay. That being said, so I was talking to the guys. I said, I'm concerned about how the youth are leaving the church, and I said, we could, a perfect way. I said, what's the homeschooling situation? He said, oh yeah, all the kids, so many of the kids in our church are homeschooled. I was thinking, oh, for that, because of all the things that are happening in the public schools, especially in Prince William, Fairfax, and Loudoun County. So you have these 3 counties that are adjacent. They're on the western, roughly the south. They're south, west, and then northwest. Loudoun County being kind of northwest of Washington, D.C. To the west is Fairfax. To the south is Prince William. I was raised in Fairfax County. Is up until relatively recently, Fairfax County was the richest county. Now it's Loudoun. And Prince William is like the 20th richest, which is kind of funny because everyone feels like they're just as poor as everyone else in the nation. It's only richest because the incomes are higher, but the real estate prices are just astronomically absurd. And so we're not really that rich. Everyone feels impoverished. It's just kind of funny how that goes. That's neither here nor there. They are very highly educated populace. In Fairfax County at one time, they had the highest concentration of scientific degrees of any place, scientific and engineering degrees of any place in the world. Also the highest proportion of lawyers, like 1 out of every 12 households is a lawyer. Because we have all the, the DC lobbies and all the stuff that goes on in DC. So it's a concentration of intellectualism. And anyway, all that is a breeding ground also, unfortunately, for a lot of indoctrination in the schools. And the parents, surprisingly, Asian parents are getting very disturbed. For the first time, normally the Asians would be voting kind of on the left side, but they don't like how their kids are being treated. And I don't blame them. And so we're getting some demographic groups actually starting to give pushback to what they're seeing. And there have been some yet unconfirmed reports, but I'm pretty sure that they're accurate, of how some of the policies in the schools with bathrooms were being terribly abused by boys that are really out there to assault young girls. And it's not being reported by the mainstream media. So a lot of this is not related directly to where I was going, but this is setting up the scenario why we have this very educated populace and also very educated church populace. In in my small congregation here, and I'm a dual member both at McLean and Occoquan. Occoquan is a small congregation, like 200 people. Uh, there's at least one woman there with a PhD from Northwestern University in chemical engineering. Very bright. She decided to be a homeschool mom. Her husband's also a PhD in chemical engineering. One of the moms recently left. She's going off to school to become a physician assistant. She was tops in her class at George Mason University in biochemistry. So these are very smart. So when you hear homeschool mom, you could get some very top professional women that have decided they want to devote their time raising their children. And so I was having a conversation with the gentleman. I said, we could probably just, we're concerned with the erosion of the Christian faith among the young. I said, one way to actually, rather than having apologetics classes, we could incorporate it in the homeschool curriculum. When they're learning certain things about biology or mathematics, physics, chemistry, we can give a little bit. When they're studying history, we can give them a little bit. So some of you all saw Dapper Dino's show here. What he was saying was very educational to me. It's like, okay, why don't you teach some of that? Let them learn about the early church fathers. This is really good history. You can connect us in the present day. You can work back. What's the chain of custody for the Bible? All the way back to Constantine. And from Constantine, you work back to what would it be? So that'd be the 4th, then the 3rd century church fathers, the 2nd century, and then the 1st century. Once you get to the 1st century, you tie it to the apostles. And the apostles, Jesus Christ, just like Dapper Dino tied it for us. And the reason I specifically invited Dapper Dino is he's not regarded as some advocate for Christianity on the internet. Whatever, he has his personal views, and I'm going to respect that. I didn't put him on the spot and say, do you believe in Jesus? I did not do that. I had enough respect for him, and he said that's not something he wants to talk about. And publicly, he will talk about it to friends personally. So I specifically had him here because of who he is, at least his persona on the internet. And I said, you see, if someone like that can make those assertions, you could teach that to homeschoolers. And so I said, so what do they teach? And the guy said, you got to talk to the wives. I'm just like, you're going to make me talk to your wives. I said, okay. So at the cookout, just had a discussion. And I said, I think we can give evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. I can identify lists of things that I think they'll be confronted with. We may not have all the answers, but we can give them a fighting chance. So we want to take someone like an aspiring Tom Holland, who, quote unquote, that's why I had him on. I had a segment on Tom Holland here. Someone that loves the Christian faith, but can't reconcile it with science. And I know he's specifically talking about Darwinian evolution. If I can even get someone like Tom Holland to be an old earth creationist or progressive creationist like Stephen Meyer, that's a huge leap forward. I say that as a young earth creationist because that's a huge step when they can say life is of miraculous origin. Because when you can admit one miracle, you could admit others. And so a progression for a lot of people that have come into the Christian faith has been, they become Christians, they may still believe in evolution, they become old earth creationists, some of them become young earth creationists. I'd be thrilled if there are some people there that are struggling. I'd rather that they, maybe they'll say, well, we don't have good evidence for young earth creation, but I accept it. Or they might say, the evidence is good for some form of creation. I'm undecided about the age of the earth. I'd be thrilled with that. in as much as if they say I'm undecided, it's like, okay, at least they're open to the possibility they could learn new facts could be uncovered that could change their viewpoint. But unlike other young earth creationists, I don't think it's the cause of moral decay that someone's an old earth creationist. I hear that a lot, and that does bother me a lot. Believing in an old earth is necessary for evolution, but it's not sufficient for evolutionary theory to be true. And therefore, it's insufficient to cause someone to be morally depraved. Someone can also be an evolutionist and they're not morally depraved. Okay, so it takes a lot more, and so I'm going to take flack for that. And when I say that I don't think believing in an old earth is cause for depravity or heresy. I've seen a lot of young earth creationists not living Christian lives, like Ted Haggard. Shouldn't laugh. But going back to the homeschool mom projects, I said, okay, I can give you some ideas. I want to hear from you all what, data from the homeschool parents. Some of them have had children go off to college already and have abandoned the faith, but they still have children that are young and going through, and I'm like, okay, I know this is a tough situation. Let's just try to gather. I said, I don't think you have to overhaul your curriculum, but maybe we can give supplemental teaching that you can give. And also, maybe we could talk about what you could learn as parents. And so that's the Homeschool Mom Project. So to that end, let me read something from Reddit. And there are lots of websites that are run by ex-Christians, where people are able to give their story. And as much as, what I think is like, the first reaction for a lot of Christians that I see sometimes is like, oh, that person's so bad, they get it wrong. Their heart was never with the Lord. I said, okay, time out. Why don't you just, okay, let's say they have failed morally. Don't dismiss, that's still not grounds to dismiss everything that they've had to say. It's not grounds to dismiss every question that they've raised. Someone may have these questions. At least, okay, there may be answers to them. There may be not that we have handy. So, let me share this deconversion story that was available on Reddit. Okay. So there's this Reddit ex-Christian, and I read through some of these. Some of them are not worth anything, but this one, creationists, by the way, let me just mention this. I found this because one creationist was impressed by this, so much so that it was cross-posted to a creationist website. So we're talking about the Homeschool Moms Project. I would like to be able to provide resources that will help supplement the homeschool curriculum when they're studying science, history, math, chemistry, you name it. And we'll deal with this. Now you'll wonder why do we talk about science, and I'll cover that. But let me just read this, and then we'll show the importance of learning science. And it might change the attitude of homeschool mothers with the importance of learning good science. Apologies. Let me maximize this. Why don't I just, I'll try to read most, she's a very good writer. Okay. I probably started questioning most fervently when I was in high school. That was when the doubts really kicked in, and when I waned from my fundy light roots that I had adhered loyally to in middle school. I was raised as a yek and Bible literalist. My parents are homophobic and transphobic, even if they deny it, and raised me to be the same way. I was saved when I was under the age of 6. I had multiple Bibles and additional literature about how not to be a slut while dating and dressing up. I was very involved in the church and even went to Bible study fellowship. Both churches I attended as a kid were non-denominational evangelical churches. This was just fine until 10th grade. Then I began doubting. My main questions were small things. Why would God tell us to kill gays if he was going to change the rules later? Why not just start with a final set of rules? Doesn't that mean gay people died that didn't have to die? Why can't women do things men can do? Why did God make us as assistants like an afterthought to men? Why would God kill the Midianites, Amalekites, Egyptian firstborns, David and Bathsheba's son, if there was a nonviolent way to change things? Why couldn't female slaves go free after 7 years, but male slaves can? Why is menstruation dirty? So that's referring, I believe she's referring to the ceremonial cleansing. So there are all sorts of things that end up being unclean. Menstruation's one of them. I was pointed to some apologetics, but eventually I found problems with those too. Around my senior year of high school, I became a liberal, lukewarm kind of non-practicing Christian, no longer homophobic, transphobic. I was a feminist and pro-choice, and I accepted evolution, but I also was fed up with going to church. It was dull. I didn't like it. So one day, not thinking anything of it, I told my mom I didn't want to attend anymore. I was 18 years old. That was a big mistake. She asked me why, and I told her. She wasn't having it. She told me I most certainly would be going to church. I refused and said she was being unfair. She then told me I'd lose privileges, phone, car, and seeing friends, TV time, general screen time. When I told her she was punishing me for not going to church, she denied it. Later that evening, she told my dad. He laughed at me and told me while I was under his roof, I was under his rules, and I would most certainly be attending church. End of story. How my parents treated me made me angry. I was an adult woman, young but still an adult. They didn't respect me. They used their financial power to twist my arm and make me comply. I think this was a pretty major catalyst for me. This really started the ball rolling because once I was resentful, my interest in learning grew exponentially. Later, I realized that I couldn't sit in the I don't know about the Christian God box and really dove into looking at stuff, even though I had a feeling I'd come out a non believer. In college, I started watching videos about the Jehovah's Witnesses, who I didn't like very much because they're abusive. Then I discovered channels that covered Quiverful and other cults. I couldn't get enough. I realized that I could see parallels between what the cult survivors were saying and my own religion. Shortly after the church fiasco, I fell into atheist YouTube through the Girl Defined Sucks portal and began searching out ex-Christian deconversion stories. That's how I found out about this subreddit, actually. The day it happened, I was sitting on my bed listening to evidence Eve 3 Dents, this video about the Old Testament. I was shocked to find out they were likely polytheistic and that Moses wasn't a real person. Combined with all the ex-Christian and other atheist witchy content I'd consumed, it felt like something snapped in that moment. The historicity of the New Testament was dependent on the Old Testament. The Old Testament was full of wild and unbelievable things, along with things that were easily proven to be false. The literal interpretation of the Bible was so warped it wasn't funny. a language tower, a global flood, a young earth, unspeakable morals, and depraved cruelty mandated and instructed by God. I tried to soothe myself with metaphor, but realized if I couldn't discern which parts were literal and which were metaphorical, how on earth was I to figure out the truth? Then I thought about how bad the system was, how individual revelation and written word was a poor medium for an all-powerful and good God. Then the problems I had with free will came rushing up too. I thought to myself, why was everybody so confused? God wasn't the author of confusion after all, right? An all-knowing God could do all these things in much better ways. It was like the Christian God, as described in the Bible, was an amalgamation of the time period and the thinking of men back then. That's the moment when I realized that I didn't believe anymore. I felt like it felt like I could breathe. The tension in my mind, the dissonance that had been sending me on a rabid search for information finally eased its foot off my throat. I was shocked, but also slightly euphoric. It was strange. My surroundings seemed too mundane compared to the fact I just had this intense, life-altering realization. So I quickly denied I'd had it. I felt I had to have all the information before I could say I wasn't a Christian. Even though I didn't believe anymore, I wouldn't accept. It took a few more weeks until I did. Then I spiraled down, down, down. I was anxious, depressed, and having an existential crisis where I realized there may be no afterlife. And even though I knew death was pretty far off and would be like before birth, it didn't comfort me because while I was conscious I didn't want to end, and knowing I would end was awful. I was immature and stunted emotionally in regards to the harder things in life. There was a good 2 to 4 months where I just grieved the fact that my heaven was gone, my security was gone, my community was gone, and my entire easy life was gone. That's when I realized the ramifications of what had happened. I had tunnel vision on discovering the truth, and now I was out in the cold, completely unprepared. I felt confused and full of anxiety all the time. I felt super raw. The God coding that allowed me to feel like there was justice and peace eventually, to deal with pain, war, and suffering, was gone. And I had bouts of gutting empathy where I would cry in my bed while thinking of someone across the world being raped or tortured or killed, and there was nothing I could do to help them. I tried to dabble in the more occult bit of the world, but my brain literally wouldn't let me. I would point out flaws. At that point, I was exhausted and just wanted to lay down, but I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't think of anything except Christianity and reality. I wanted to go invest in my other hobbies, but I couldn't because everything looped back to my deconversion. But I eventually began to adjust. It took a while. I felt bad. I never cried about losing God until 6 months later, where I begged him to show me a sign, to open the blinds, make a green flower bud bloom, to write with my pen that he was God, and to do it all in 5, 6, 10 minutes. I did the test prayer multiple times, all while crying and begging. I was sincere and hoped he would because it would make things easier. It would hurt less. I would know for certain, but he never did. Then I cried, then because it was so final, and I felt incredibly alone. Now, wow. Uh, I actually could relate to a lot of where she, if you want to picture me 21 years is very much me. Not exactly. I mean, because I was a much older man than she was. You could tell she was going through a lot of teenage things, just rebellion with the family. My choice to leave or stay in the Christian faith had nothing to do. I was already a senior engineer, scientist, senior engineer. My title changed junior scientist to senior engineer. So I didn't have all the drama with the parents taking away my privileges, but I could relate when she was talking about people somewhere being raped that hit home, because some of you know that my aunt Connie Reyes in 1990 was raped and murdered. It was in the newspapers in Kenosha. There may be a television special on that case on the Oxygen Network. They have contacted me and asked me if I'd be willing to show up on camera to memorialize my aunt. I will, if this goes through and they decide to have me on. They're relatives that are actually closer in relation to Aunt Connie than myself. The word aunt in the Filipino usage is a little different than here in the United States. She's like the first cousin of my mother. So that's neither here nor there, but I could relate to seeing the problems in the world. There are passages in the Old Testament that even recently are very troubling, like the when David sacrificed the children of Saul to appease God. It's like, where did that come from? That's really tough to swallow. So we talk about the Amalekites, and then like David's son dying for the sins of David that he committed with Bathsheba. It's like, well, Lord, why was the son punished? Now, some of the answers I gave in some of the Bible studies I was reading, I said, look at 1 Kings 14. This helps. But, and you know, what drove her away is between her and God. I sense a spirit that's not good. I'm sorry to say that. And pigs can fly kind of has his finger on it right there. Rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. Okay, so she mentioned she started to even think about the occult. I said, you're going to go from Christianity, you're going to think about the occult. There were some things too that were like she didn't like the way God was doing business with in relation to women. I said, okay. And you know, I'm just saying that I'm going to empathize, but then I'll be critical. I have to point out, I said, she's not in a position to tell how God should do things. There's a strong rebellious spirit in her. And no amount of homeschooling, even doing it right, giving the truth, if someone's going to rebel, you just can't stop it. If they're in their heart, if in their heart they feel that they know better than God how to run the world, I don't know what to do with that. And it's going to be a tough conversation to point out, that the Lord gives people free will. You can be in the time of Jesus, and you just look at the Pharisees, they can have all the evidence and all the best teaching in the world. They have free will to walk away. And I know every mother would be like, well, can you write a curriculum that's airtight, and that if we follow this and we use your supplemental materials that we develop together, that the kids won't rebel. That's not going to happen. So I was saying, what can we do about, how does this relate to the science curriculum? One may not like something. One may resist it, as C.S. Lewis resisted it. But you can't resist facts ultimately. You can ignore the facts. You can only resist it in the sense you might ignore it, but it doesn't change the truth. The truth is, it's becoming increasingly evident that the universe is finely tuned. This is something the universe can't do on its own, tune itself. Not to mention it can't create itself. Secondly, from a purely statistical standpoint, the phenomenon of life is a statistical miracle. can make a very good argument for that. You can either run away from it and go to Dave Farina as a resource if your heart is really against God, but you can't. You have a choice between Dave Farina and James Tour, okay? Or Change Tan and with Change Tan and Rob Stadler and James Carter, Ryan Hayes, Sygart backing them up on that team. Then you have guys like Dave Farina on the other side. Who makes the better argument that life is improbable? Or at the very least, as James Tour would probably say, is that there's no way that we're anywhere near finding a naturalistic answer to the origin of life. Can't run away from those facts. And then we have history. Just like the way Dapper Dino laid it out. It's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe someone who's a counter-creationist actually making the case for Christianity so well. And he said he wasn't there to argue for evidence, the Christian faith. He was there to just set the historical record straight as best as he knew how. I was like, I was thinking to myself, praise God for Dapper Dino. You laid this case out better than I could have. There other believers here could lay it out better. And Mr. Jetty's one of them, and I want to thank him. And let's see, there's a good comment here that she wanted proof. And we'll cover this. So this is a good point, and it'll come up, and I wish someone had said it. I said, okay, if you can tell God and you can demand a miracle to make you believe, there's a problem here. If you can tell God to show up at every experiment you want to reassure you, when you want, how many times, and she was saying like within 10, 15 minutes. If you can do that, that's not a God at all. He's the one that decides when to do things. Because if you could tell him what and how to do things, you're equivalently God. That's not going to work. And it says in Proverbs 25:2, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, glory kings to search it out. The reason I wanted to share Tom Holland's story was that was really compelling. On some level, she sort of understood it. Tom Holland was saying Christianity makes sense of everything, if only if it were true. She could at least grasp that. But I think, she was so, because she's a girl, she's she's much more sensitive to this whole issue of kind of the patriarchy in the Bible. And it's interesting to hear it from her perspective, because I'm a guy, I don't care about that as much, honestly. Maybe that's male privilege. I don't know. It's still very, she definitely had more hang-ups than maybe some of the guys would, because I honestly, most guys I hang out with don't talk about women's rights. Okay, that's really not on their mind. There are other things, that guys think about. Honestly, most guys I interact with are interested about their own ambitions and getting ahead. And it's like, yeah, that's a guy thing. You look out for number one. For better or worse, if you hang around guys that are highly competitive, and to some extent, if you're too nice, you're not respected. I'm a nice guy, probably not totally respected because I just seem to cave in too much. But yeah, I'm sorry. That's just okay. That's neither here nor there. So she wanted proof. So I'll say this. It's a noble thing if you want God's presence to be so strong in your life and he's reassuring you every moment. That's a totally noble thing. So this is the one thing I would say to the homeschool moms. Don't demean someone's desire to be reassured by God all the time, every minute. That's a noble thing. What won't work, though, is that he shows up on your whim and demand. Because an all-powerful God, you would not expect to do that. You have to throw yourself on God's mercy that he'll sustain you. And but never diminish anyone's desire for God to reveal himself to them, but he does it on his terms, not our terms. And that's the starting point. And then, you know, there might come a point someone is just like, oh, I don't like the way God does business. And you notice she said she didn't like it and that she thought she knew better. That's problematic. But what I was relating this, no, that's not Tom Holland, the Spider-Man actor. In case you missed it, protract, that's Tom Holland, the historian, and I gave a link in the video description. So, I was saying what I would put in the homeschool curriculum. I said, given all those caveats, at least you can, the homeschool parents can say, well, I've given my child the best available. That some answers has been there, and I would, and this isn't about me writing. I want the homeschool parents to help us collectively. This is our project to write what we think are good arguments and what has been effective, because it's that next generation of kids that's going to go out there in the world, and we are engineering their weapons of war, so to speak, intellectual weapons. They're going to be out there, and we're going to see if the weapons fail. We need feedback to find out, okay, we have to take an honest look and say, were these good enough arguments? Could we have done better? And I always say there's always going to be room for improvement on various fronts. So on the science front, I can tell you, we're going to do very well with Stairway to Life. That might be way over the head of high school kids. But if we can distill that, I know we have A+ arguments that will withstand a university environment. I mean, Change Tan, professor of molecular biology. So I know we have A+ arguments against abiogenesis, very good arguments against eukaryotic evolution. There are problems, there are challenges trying to explain the purpose of the nested hierarchies that we see in biology. That's a project that I'm working on, and that was related even indirectly to the peer-reviewed publication that I had out. Hopefully there'll be more. With protein structural biology, the answer to the similarity question is that God optimized things in all biology for scientific discovery. That's why we look so similar to chimps, not because of evolution. We can also make the genetic entropy arguments. Give them a fighting chance and say, okay, we haven't proven it absolutely, but are you going to risk your soul and abandon this? People that, and this is tough medicine, the people that are going to start to say that they know better than God how to do things, it's like that's the wrong attitude. No amount of persuasion I found can help that. So she asked this very simple question: why was menstruation dirty? Okay, so I can't, that's a very good question. Go to the book of Leviticus, and God just says, this is uncleanness, and the woman has to go through a certain ritual to cleanse it. And then it's not in the New Testament. That's actually a good question. So let's say we have a situation where I can't answer that. I would be interested to hear. I remember there was someone in our church, he had to move away. I wish he were still in our church. He had a huge family. He and his wife had a huge family. And he was teaching his girls about the book of Leviticus. And he said, yeah, it's kind of, you can imagine how it was where they basically were announcing to the world that they're having a period because they had to go through cleansing rituals. And I don't know how he explained it to his girls. Now this guy was a police officer, and he saw some stuff I wouldn't want to see. He's taken down some criminals that were just doing some horrible things, and he got hired to be the like the head of a prison. A tough dude, seen some tough things, and I really wish I had more time to spend with him. Tell me how you teach your girls about stuff like that. But let's say hypothetically we don't have, that no one's able to find at the time an answer specifically why God would highlight that. I'd say, well, you can accept it by faith if you believe Jesus rose from the dead. Isn't that the most important thing? If there's a God and Jesus is his son, that settles it, doesn't it? It's a good question, and maybe you can ask God when you see him someday, is that enough to make you not believe in God because you think that's silly? And that might be as far as we take it. I thought that was an interesting. I never gave it a second thought, but it's like, yeah, I guess a girl would really notice that, and she notices stuff like that, and I'd be interested to see what collectively the homeschool parents, and then I'll contribute the science question, answers that to the best of my abilities. We have a theologian for a pastor. Let's see what we can come up with. And my answer is, if Jesus rose from the dead, if you can accept that, if you can accept that there's a creator, that really does settle everything. It's just going to be more reassuring when you can have something that relates to how we humans understand good and bad. So, like for the question of the problem of evil, I tried to relate it to Snow White. One woman, she has 3 grown daughters. She said, that's actually a good explanation. I needed to hear that because I've heard some explanations that weren't good. I had a pastor that covered Job and trying to work out the problem of evil. I'm just like, I don't think it was very. I think Job actually gives a slightly different message than what you think. The explanation for the problem of evil is very well resolved in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians 4:17, one verse. This momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And you can build from that. Job was actually, to me, that book dealt with way more issues, and it actually didn't give such a succinct answer to the problem of evil, as did it's so much more clearly stated in the New Testament. So this pastor was just covering Job for a long time, and this was like about 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but they got rid of him because he got found. The police were called to his home because his wife called the police for beating her and his children. And why am I saying this? Some of these basic questions are not answered, and you have preachers that aren't walking right before God, and they're not answering it either. I'm hoping that we're having a little bit of reset now that that pastor's gone, and I really like the guy personally. He's very sweet to my mother. Not sweet to his own wife and kids, unfortunately, but he's very sweet to people in the congregation. I'm just like, dude, you kind of blew it there talking about the problem of evil. You had it right there. Why did you not do 2 Corinthians 4:17? C.S. Lewis had a book that alludes to this, The Weight of Glory. And I didn't think he preached Job real well. And I'm sorry to tell you that, Pastor. If you're listening, I think you tried and you were a good teacher, but you didn't teach that very well, and you kind of blew it with your own family. Sorry to say that. So we'll see. Hopefully we can come up with something to, and that's the homeschool mom project. I call it the homeschool mom project because even though it is the homeschool parents, it's really the moms, almost, at least in the two co-ops here, what we call cooperative education. It's run by, it's really headed up by the mothers teaching their children. And so from a scholarly perspective, I'd like to try to collect some of the answers, because some of these kids will say, how do we know, what about the dinosaurs and what about the Cambrian explosion? And it's like, okay, why don't you look at the faint young son paradox? There's some issues here. You may not be able to give a killer case, but you have something there if you want to try to talk about Noah's flood and all. Now, I'm not trying to disrespect. I know there's some great people here in the side chat that are old earth creationists, may have different views on Noah's flood. That's fine. But I think, when they're learning earth sciences or something, give them the data. It'd be, just because I respect old earth creationists and I don't want to offend them, it doesn't mean that I hold back data that some of the young earth creationists will point to. You give them both sets of facts, and you give them arguments for and against. I know that when I talked to someone who was struggling, he said, I just became, and I had a video on this, he said he became an atheist a few months earlier before he met me, and he thought he had really good arguments. And I said, did you know about this or this? He said, no one told me. He said, he's the son of an elder, and no one in his church even addressed this. He said, and I was feeling, oh man, if someone had just talked to him, maybe we could have at least delayed the process. I don't know. I never heard back from him. So that's the homeschool mom project. I will probably talk about it as we start to develop it. So I'm now starting to try to collect ideas. What can we do? So this girl's deconversion story is kind of a start. It kind of highlights kind of like, okay, what you might deal with. Some of those definitely are spiritual issues, okay? And lordship issues. It's like, to the extent someone thinks they can do it better than God, it's like, okay, that's going to be tough to fight with. Academics is not going to solve that. There may be some questions that can be solved academically. There's some things that could be dealt with where we might have better answers, like for the problem of evil. I'll tell you, YouTube's favorite daughter, at least in our group of discussion, Gutsick Gibbon, she said one reason for her deconversion was the problem of evil. So we can at least treat some things at an academic level. Maybe that's about all we could do, since we're talking about homeschool curricula. But ultimately, it's God's Spirit. When Peter was at the Last Supper, Jesus said, when Simon Peter was at the Last Supper, Jesus said to Simon, I'm praying for you that your faith may not fail. And that tells me Jesus ultimately is the author and finisher of our faith. It doesn't rest on our arguments or how well we're able to teach or not teach. That still, it doesn't absolve us of a responsibility to try to do the best we can. We can't take credit for when someone believes. We can be responsible for teaching things as best as we can. And even if there are already believers, we can comfort them. You know what? I can't tell you how much of a comfort it has been to just look at nature and think about what God has done. It's a worshipful experience. So not only are we trying to, I guess, equip the young to be able to go out in the world and resist the arrows, the intellectual arrows being thrown at them, but also to be able to give them daily encouragement. If we're able to teach them science well and teach them aspects of God's creation, they can be comforted every day. Because actually, when Jesus is encouraging and commanding all of us to not be anxious. He cites the example of the lily of the valley. To consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. That is part of the cure for not being anxious, is considering God's creation. So I will say one of the things in the homeschool curriculum is we're going to equip people with science to be able to look at the world through the lens of the majesty, through the lens of science, to see the majesty and power of God, that he could build something like the photosynthesis process and all the things that make lilies of the valley and all these plants grow, or anything that's living. Her mentality was, God, work a miracle for me. Using science, we could see that God has worked enormous miracles. You'll see it. We know about God's eternal power, his divine nature through the things that are made. God is telling us that's his terms of how he reaches out to us. We don't dictate to him how he's going to reach out to us. He dictates the terms of how faith is built. That is one of the avenues to faith. They can take it or leave it. I mean, that's tough medicine. And I get that. I get that. But where else, what I would say, and this is, again, when they're studying math, teach them a little bit about, risk management. I call it, I'm not going to use the word gambling, call it risk management. Because that has better connotations. Where are you going to go? You take a risk management principle. If you have everything to lose and nothing to gain, that's a bad wager. So I have to think about, that's a bad investment. Good investment is where you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. See the Christian life in that context. I tell that young lady, okay, so you don't like the way God does business. Logically speaking, you're not in a position to judge, are you? She'll accept that. And I'll say, where else are you going to go? Where else are you going to go? Where are you going to decide? God has outlined how you can know about him through the things that are made. And also the works. Look at the works. Look at history, archaeology, and all the other things. That's what I'd say. Now, what I'm interested in is, I want to hear what the young people have to say. I want them to have the freedom to be honest and say, what Sal's saying is either good or bad, or it's lousy. What is not sometimes healthy in the church is when a pastor gives a lousy sermon, we feel so reluctant to say, hey, dude, what you said was just either not right or just uninspiring or irrelevant to where our needs are. Or you're so focused on the grammar structure and trying to explain how miraculous that was. You really didn't treat the path. Okay, I'm not going to be that way. I want to see you tell our group, the homeschool mom group, really the homeschool parents, what works, doesn't work. I'll help collect the ideas. And we'll codify it and say, okay, this is the best we have. First edition, second edition. And we'll go through these iterations. So that's the homeschool mom project. Because I've kind of had that in mind. But as I've been doing these evidence and reasons for the Christian faith shows, I kept thinking, okay, this has to be, some of the stuff we talk about, the average churchgoer doesn't, especially the kids don't know it. So I'm excited about this. So this is a chance for the stuff to translate some of the stuff you've been hearing on this channel and field testing it. Like a good engineer, we want to field test it. So finally, our last topic is J.C. Phillips, and I've been meaning to talk about that. So let me just scan through the chat and highlight. I know that ever since I know that ever since seeing the world as God's handiwork, I look at animals a lot differently. I don't even like to squish bugs if I can help it. Same here. If they cooperate, I let them go outside. You need to believe, Mr. Jetty, it's great to see you. You need to believe that God rewards those who search him out. And thank you for the kind words here, Mr. Your gift is giving comfort to others. Thank you. Apologetics has been ignored by churches for many years until fairly recently. Yes, yes. The church model, sadly, particularly in evangelical circles, is don't get them to think. Just give them a great worship service. Have a pastor that's charismatic. Create a nice social atmosphere and entertain them with music. I know that's harsh for me to say that, but I've seen their business model. I said, don't you want to explore evidence and reasons for the Christian faith? So that's a great idea. And never get back to me to talk about it. I said, I'm here. I work for Dr. Sanford. You don't want me to talk about biology at all? It's like, you get these funny looks. It's like, what does that have to do with loving Jesus? I'm like, okay, what does that have to do with evangelism? It's like, okay, you see where these churches are going and what's happening to our youth. Um, uh, you hear stories of like this young lady here, okay, and I do have, I have to point out her heart has not quite in the right place, but how many people can she compromise because, she's able to promote these arguments and do them quite persuasively? How equipped are we to deal with that? So, oh, okay, I'm not going to read that. Thank you for the comment. This is a good insight. The body is meant to be gross to remind us we are not God. Something like that. There are a lot of things the way our body is made to remind us we aren't God. Amen. Yesterday was a hard time. God is always teaching new things. Too many churches are just social groups. Exactly. Is it any surprise then that social media then is dominating the youth? One, we do have studies that they're on social media a lot, and it doesn't really help them in terms of their emotional mental health. But they, just like a bad drug, they're addicted to it, but it erodes where they are. But you see, if the church's leverage was not truly the gospel to begin with, that they were just an organized social group, that was their business model, just trying to get as many people into their social group as possible. They now have competition that's just blowing them away. And so if you weren't giving them nourishing spiritual food, what they really needed, which was the truth, is it surprising that we're losing the next generation, at least for now? Because you were really, your focus wasn't trying to give them evidence and reasons to believe. It's the responsibility of the church to shepherd the people, to help them in their faith. Socializing helps a little bit. Okay, so we need a little, but if you're not teaching them Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and 20, we know about God through the things that are made. Not teaching them that. Jesus said, if you do not believe my words, believe the works. How much do we, and I'm confessing, I learned more from Dapper Dino than I have since I got saved in 1978 about the church fathers. That's sad. I mean, I learned a little bit on my own. And there are people here in the side chat that know way more than me. Why isn't this ever taught? The way Dapper I'm just like, it really does put us to shame. I said, here's someone who's a counter-creationist. He was able to rattle this off so much better. And, because of my focus on the science side, I haven't had a chance to do the archaeology side. That's why I'm grateful Dr. Sandy Pigeon is joining the channel to help me out on this, because his doctorate was in area, really ministerial education with educational ministries with an emphasis in applied apologetics. So apologetics actually wasn't his PhD, but it's kind of an important emphasis in it. And so, and Mr. Jetty here sent me a great video by Tim McGrew. I need to learn that. And this is stuff, it's like, sorry to be critical here, but then I get to hear the same recycled sermons that almost anyone in the pew that reads their Bible could probably do a better job. It's not good. It's not a good situation what people are not learning that they should be learning that would help them believe, and they're not getting it. I'm sorry to be so critical, but we see need now, and I'm glad, at least at the local church, the Christian mothers are rightly showing concern and wanting to see if they can incorporate a little bit to help their children have their faith strengthened. So now that I've gone through as much of the side chat as I could, the last topic is J.C. Phillips. And let me see if I can bring this up. This is very interesting because he's a National Academy member. Let me see if I'm going to highlight his qualifications. James Charles Phillips. Okay, here we go. James Charles Phillips, born 1933, is an American physicist and a member of the National Academy of Science since 1978. Phillips invented the exact theory of the ionicity of chemical bonding in semiconductors, as well as new theories of compacted networks, including glasses, high-temperature superconductors, and proteins. And if I hear the word proteins, I'm interested. So, how does this relate to intelligent design? He came out and wrote a proceeding. Because he's a National Academy member, he can publish whatever he wants. Maybe not exactly that. In the journal known as the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That means you're a trusted member. You can write it. Maybe someone will give you flack if you say something too off the wall. But you can at least publish. And, with less barriers to entry. Let's just put it that way. You have a lot more freedom. And it's a respected journal, Proceedings National Academy of Sciences. And let me see, Phillips. And he published an article, and he got in trouble with it. He is at Rutgers University, the same university your Dr. Dan is. I asked Dr. Dan if he'd ever seen J.C. Phillips. He said, nah, different department, and it is a big university. There's even an evolutionary biologist there, Helen Fisher, who may be a visiting scholar, and he doesn't know her. So she's one of my favorite evolutionary biologists. So anyway, he went out and said there's aspects of proteins that are clearly intelligently designed. It wasn't in his article, but I think when he submitted it, you're allowed to like make a comment in the journal or something, that advertising. He said this is proof of intelligent design. He caught some flack for it from another member, Eugene Koonin. I've mentioned Koonin before because his staff member was my professor when I was at the FEAS graduate school at the NIH. And so Koonin is also a National Academy member, probably one of the most respected evolutionary biologists on the planet. Koonin gave J.C. Phillips an earful. So one of the problems is Phillips's writing is really tough, and I think he really did botch the evolutionary side of this. He's talking about natural selection and neutral evolution. I think he got it backward, but he said this is clear evidence of intelligent design. And he used terms in protein biology I've never heard. Now, I've heard of the term hydrophobicity. He uses the word hydropathic. He said there is a relation in the hydropathic curves of proteins that clearly show adaptation of a protein across species that's adapted specifically to that organism. So we have aquatic creatures that have a certain hydropathic profile. You get the same protein in a human, it's adapted to the human environment. So I don't know if he did this study with topoisomerase, and you know that's my main protein. You can look at the topoisomerases in a variety of creatures, and what he's saying is the hydropathic profile is definitely tailored, optimized for that creature. So, being in the engineering world, it's like, yeah, that airplanes can function at a variety of altitudes, but that there's an optimal altitude where they perform exceptionally well, and that there are parts that are optimized for that. And so I could totally get it that, yes, you can mutate, the evolutionists will say that these parts are not, you can change them, the creature's not going to die. That may be true, but it's compromised. So we know that a car can still function, but it's not at its optimal peak of functionality if you tweak a few things. Same with proteins. You can change some of the amino acids. It doesn't totally break the protein. And again, I need to point out, creationists, if you're listening, not every amino acid is 100% critical. It may alter the optimality, but it doesn't break it. Now, there are some proteins, parts of some proteins, if you break it, it's gone. Even a single amino acid. I know that for like a insulin receptor, and I know that there are probably positions on the topoisomerase you could just knock out one amino acid, the whole protein's gone. But there are other parts you can kind of tweak, and you can mutate. It may not have any over noticeable effect. But what J.C. Phillips is saying is he could clearly see that depending on the creature, it has a different hydropathic profile. And again, I've looked that term up. It's not very common, at least in the field that I study. I definitely get hydrophobic and hydrophilic. Hydropathic there's something there that I don't know yet. So I'm just being open there. I don't know. But the hydropathic being optimized per creature, he said that's evidence of intelligent design. And the evolutionary biologists were like really quick to try to pounce on that. And I don't think J.C. Phillips is retracted. I did point out that he's done pioneering work in physics, and that he worked out the exact theories of certain things. I would say that if he just threw away the evolutionary language that he had in his paper, where you're saying natural selection optimized this or that, and he's getting kind of the neutral evolution more. If he just stuck to the physics and said this is optimized per creature, and that's evidence of intelligent design, I think his paper would have been fine. And here we're hearing from our chemist, our resident. This is great having someone in the side chat that has done chemistry in his life professionally. And he says, I don't see how proteins can't be very, very intelligently designed. Your average polymers can have a lot of useful properties, but they don't do tasks. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So for those of you who've seen my videos on proteins, I go through like topoisomerases, helicases, all these multimeric proteins like transmembrane proteins, potassium ion channel, and even some that would seem even more mundane that I haven't covered yet, like collagen, just phenomenal. And we could just do this all day and look at the wonder of proteins. So this, so this thing on J.C. Phillips should require a little bit more investigation so we can understand what he's saying. And I do think the evolutionary biologists are correct, and Dr. Dan actually was also critical that his use of his analysis, framing it in terms of natural selection, neutral evolution, was totally off. But I do think his evaluation of the hydropathic profiles was accurate, and that does support intelligent design. I don't know that it's strong enough to make the case for intelligent design as much as kind of the way that we've done it on this channel, where when you've seen the videos that I've been showing, I think that makes a stronger case. But if you can accept that, then you can see this is another layer of intelligent design. But the big news is that's the second person in the National Academy of Sciences that has stepped forward and been favorable to design theory. The other one being the late Dr. Phil Skell. And then there are other Nobel Prize winners too, like Richard Smalley, and some historically. So that's pretty much it for tonight. Uh, this stream ended up being 3 hours and 9 minutes, and my voice is about to quit, but it's been a while since it's been about a week since I've done one of my variety show monologues. I do like having co-hosts, but I don't want to wear them out. Dr. Pigeon's kind of busy now with other things, and Emory is in the middle of final exams. So maybe after all the smoke clears, we can have these gentlemen here, and then we have other people like Patrick and maybe someday Ray and some of the others in the chat. I just haven't gotten around to having any shows in mind where I could pick them as co-hosts yet, but I look forward to co-hosting shows with you all. The other thing is I'm hoping to be spending more time on my other channel doing chemistry lectures, primarily to help me relearn general chemistry and then move on to organic chemistry, then molecular biology. The only other show that I have scheduled is S.J. Tomlinson. She wrote me today and requested we postpone it till Wednesday instead of Tuesday. So we'll be talking about experiential education, which happens to tie to the homeschool mom project. So it's been great, and I hope that these variety streams have been an encouragement to you all. I know that there's pain in all of our lives, and maybe when we gather together and meditate on the works that God has done, we can be uplifted. And I've tried to do that today. So the Lord be with you. Take care. God bless you, and have a great evening.